You know, that comment about unsuccessfully was just between me and him. I don't know why he had to repeat that. Thank you all so much for coming here. It's great to see you all, see friends, see people I haven't met before, and to have this opportunity to talk about the new food revolution, the good food revolution, what that means and what it means here in Montgomery County. I want to talk a little bit first about where we are. Then I want to talk about the work that Montgomery Victory Gardens has been doing, and then I want to talk about what does any of this have to do with revolution. And where's my clicker? Okay. So industrial agriculture is where we are right now. And most people have heard about the Green Revolution, you know, massive infusion of technologies in the 1960s, massive increases in agricultural production. All quite true. And good considered by itself, but that's of course not the end of the story. Now, industrial agriculture is more than just man-made. All agriculture in one form or another is an invention of humans. Industrial agriculture is a particular type of agriculture that tries to put an industrial model on top of a natural process. Let's see if I can make this work. Industrial agriculture. And when you do that, when you put industrial model on top of a natural process, you're getting four major characteristics that I think are important to keep in mind. First of all, industrial agriculture replaces diversity with monoculture, both plant and animal. Nature loves diversity. Nature abhors monoculture. Second, industrial agriculture replaces the work of human beings and animals with the work of machines. Third, industrial agriculture replaces clean, free, limitless solar energy with fossil fuels. And four, industrial agriculture replaces the nutrient cycle and natural pest management with artificial fertilizers, pesticides, and herbicides. So yes, as a result of this, we have had a massive increase in agriculture yield. What else have we gotten? Industrial agriculture is polluting the water. Who here knows what a dead zone is? Okay? Dead zones around the world, hypoxic zones in places like the Gulf of Mexico is a primary one for this country, are caused largely by industrial agriculture runoff. The nutrients, the nitrogen fertilizers, which they spray in huge amounts, get washed downstream, and they all, if you look at the corn belt, the wheat belt, the soybean belt of the Midwest, all that fertilizer comes down the Mississippi River, and you have a dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico each summer the size of New Jersey. What happens is the nutrients cause an algae bloom so profusely that they suck all the oxygen out of the water, and literally nothing else can live there, certainly no fish. So first of all, industrial agriculture is polluting our water. Secondly, it's also polluting the air. When you consider that industrial agriculture is heavily dependent on fossil fuels for the production, processing, transportation, and distribution of all the food it produces, you realize why, according to some estimates, agriculture is one of the largest contributors of greenhouse gas emissions in the world, comparable to the transportation system. And particularly, I think, when you include the methane that's produced in the industrial meat production process of CAFOs, methane being a much stronger greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide is. Third, industrial agriculture is destroying the soil. Whether you're talking about, in some places, incessant tilling, or if you're talking about the incessant applications of synthetic pesticides and herbicides that are destroying the microbial life in soil that is so essential to long-term productivity, we are wasting away topsoil in industrial agriculture at rates 10 to 15 times faster than it can be naturally reproduced. We are losing the topsoil that we grow in. Fourth, I guess I should be pointing it over there as opposed to there, but fourth, it's destroying biodiversity. First of all, remember that all the plants and the animals, they co-evolved. So a diversity of insect life and birds co-evolved with the natural plants. When you start reducing the plants and creating monoculture, you reduce the number of things that that diversity of plants and animals has to, or that insects and birds have to feed on. In addition, when you're spraying lots of pesticides, you are killing things in addition to the stuff you're trying to kill. And a particular example of this, a very good example, I think, is colony collapse disorder. Has everyone heard of that? In the past 4 to 5 years, we've lost roughly 40% of all the commercial beehives. And they still don't know exactly why, but it's certainly presumed that 2 major reasons are, one, the limited diet that the bees are now getting because of monocultures, and also the pesticides in the crops that they go into. And that's very important because bees fertilize, pollinate roughly 1/4 to 1/3 of all the food we eat. So if we lose the bees, if we continue to lose bees, we're going to have a real problem. So it's polluting the air, it's polluting the water, it's destroying the soil, it's destroying biodiversity. That's not all industrial agriculture is doing. It's ruining our health. Industrial agriculture is just not about how food is grown, it's about what food is grown, what food is sold to us. Agribusiness has learned that it can maximize its profits by getting us essentially hooked on a diet which is high sugar, high fat, high carbohydrate. That is a terrible national diet. And because of that national diet, we now have skyrocketing rates of childhood obesity and diabetes. They used to call it, by the way, adult onset diabetes. Now they call it type 2 diabetes. Why? Because children are getting it. Why? Because of the food they eat. Think fast. We are, when you look at the effects on our national health of the national diet, the CDC, Center for Disease Control, estimates that 1 out of every 3 children born after the year 2000 will contract diabetes during their lifetime. And furthermore, this is the first generation of children who are going to live shorter lives than their parents. And it's specifically because of our national diet. In addition, industrial agriculture is spreading disease. What do I mean by this? Well, again, and now it's not just about how the food is grown and what type of food gets grown, but how that food is processed and distributed. When you have, as you do in industrial agriculture, these hugely centralized processing and distribution networks, well, there are 2 things. One, you ensure that whatever role greed plays in human affairs, it really gets, emphasized in centralized food processing. And if you read things like the Food Safety News Alert, there are regular incidents of food buyers being convicted of taking bribes so that they put like tainted tomatoes in Kraft tomato sauce. Major producers. I'm not talking about, small things on the side. In addition, the fact that it's so centralized means that if you get any food pathogen in that processing center, you are guaranteeing that you are now going to spread that in the most optimal fashion everywhere in the country, because that's how the food is distributed nationally. So the industrial agriculture system is spreading disease. And why exactly, by the way, speaking of this, why exactly do we find E. coli, which is an intestinal disease, on spinach, which I'm taking the Master Gardener class. My wife tells me I'll be a Master Gardener. I'm taking the Master Gardener class right now, and as far as I know, spinach does not have intestines. And yet, we're finding intestinal diseases on vegetables. Again, the CDC estimates, their most recent estimates that just came out a few months ago, that 1 out of every 6 Americans gets sick from food pathogens in our food system every year. That's 48 to 50 million Americans get sick every year from our national food system. In addition, the industrial agriculture system is poisoning us. The FDA and the EPA only have scant information. Boy, you read this stuff and it's so alarming, but they only have scant information on maybe a couple dozen of the literally thousands of chemicals that are used in industrial processes, including industrial food production. There are no long-term studies of what it means to have all these things on our food system. But we do know, and this is someone from the Environmental Working Group told me this, which I thought made a lot of sense. She said, no, we don't have a lot of long-term studies yet. But you know what? Pesticide and herbicide end with "cide." It means to kill living things. Do we really need 15 to 20 years of studies to figure out this isn't the best stuff to be putting on our food? That's not all. Industrial agriculture is driving farmers out of business. Do you know that there are now more prisoners in the United States of America than there are farmers? That's bad on 2 fronts. We incarcerate the highest percentage of our population of any country in the world, which is a whole nother presentation. But we've been systematically driving farmers off the land in direct relation to the profits of agribusiness, which is hysterical, because if you live around Washington and you hear these ads from Monsanto, and usually Monsanto, but other companies as well, oh, they are the friends of the farmer, they want to help the farmer, and yet whenever their profit goes up, more farmers go out of business. And a lot of farmers, by the way, who are continuing to stay on the land have to work off-farm jobs now to make a living, because with the wonders of industrial agriculture, they can't make enough money to sustain their family by farming anymore. Industrial agriculture tortures countless animals. I was struggling with what words to use here, and I'm going to spare you pictures, as I could show you in a PowerPoint presentation. Gandhi said that you can judge the moral character of a nation by how it treats its animals. If that is true, I shudder to think about the moral character of this country based on what we do to animals in CAFOs every day. CAFOs, you all know what they are? Concentrated Animal Feeding Operation, feedlots. You know, the confinement of huge amounts of animals in small spaces where they're not supposed to be is just the beginning of the torture. You know, because they're not supposed to be there, they start exhibiting all sorts of behaviors, like chickens will peck each other. What's their answer? They cut the beaks off of the chickens. Pigs start eating each other's tails. What's their answer to that? They cut off the tails of the pigs. They also, in these operations, feed them often things they were never meant to eat. This is particularly true for beef, livestock. They bring them into these CAFOs and they force feed them huge amounts of corn. The big product of the industrial agriculture system. Cows are not supposed to eat corn. They did not evolve to eat corn. They're supposed to eat grass. And because they're eating corn, guess what? They're getting a lot of diseases. E. coli is a feedlot disease. And because they're getting lots of diseases, how does industrial agriculture keep them alive until they can get to the market? Antibiotics. 70% of all the antibiotics used in the United States of America are given to livestock, specifically to keep them alive in these inhumane conditions long enough to sell them. By the way, this is one, and as I said, I mean, I've seen pictures. One of the reasons you know that this is horrible is because they won't let you inside to see what they're doing. That's usually a good tip-off. I have seen pictures, and my own resolution for this year, because I do believe, by the way, that it is possible to eat meat morally and sustainably, environmentally speaking, but my resolution for this year is I am no longer eating any meat that I do not know was humanely treated and pasture-raised, which when you go out to dinner makes you a vegetarian, but hey, there's good vegetarian food out there. And lastly, the industrial agriculture system is spreading hunger. Well, this seems counterintuitive, right? Because it's created this like abundance of food calories. Well, there are a few things. First of all, industrial agriculture is extremely susceptible to extreme environment, things like drought and heat. So that when you have, as we did last year, huge heat waves in Russia, they lost 40% of their wheat crop. Global prices went up. We are right now experiencing a huge heat wave and drought in the wheat-growing parts of China. Global food prices go up. Industrial agriculture and monoculture is also the most susceptible to diseases and infections. The Cavendish banana. Who's heard about the Cavendish banana? Okay? This is the one type of banana sold in the United States. There are literally hundreds of species, but one type. It's a monoculture banana, like corn number 2, is the Cavendish. And guess what? A bacteria has found its way into Cavendish plantations around the world and is right now slowly wiping them out. That's what you hate when you get monoculture. So it spreads hunger because as all these things happen, prices keep going up. Food prices right now are at the highest level in recorded history. And the last thing that's such a problem, and I heard Jonathan speaking about this near the end of his talk, is that in the industrial food system, food has been made into a commodity. Food is not grown to feed people. Food is grown to feed a corporate profit margin. It's a product. And whether, you know, if a corporation can make more money feeding the corn it grows to livestock or turning it into ethanol, to get government subsidies, it doesn't matter how many people are starving around the world because that's what's most profitable for the corporation to do. We did see food riots in 2008, the last time we had a food price spike like this around the world. I suspect we will be seeing food riots around the world this year as well as increases in prices in your own supermarkets of anywhere between 5 to 10%. It's a long list. You put all these things together and you begin to realize why, as many people have said, industrial agriculture is unsustainable. What does that mean, unsustainable? I give you a quote from the prophet Michael Pollan from the holy book, The Omnivore's Dilemma. Unsustainable is a word that's been so abused we're apt to forget what it very specifically means. Sooner or later, it must collapse. Industrial agriculture, our food system, is headed toward collapse. Another way to put it, by the way, from Wendell Berry. Anyone here know Wendell Berry? Check out this new book, collection of his essays. It's called Bringing It to the Table. Wendell Berry was saying everything that Michael Pollan said it. He was saying it 30 years ago. He's a genius. He said, yes, the abundance of industrial agriculture is great. The price of that abundance is the ruination of its sources. Wendell's always more poetic than some of the other authors. So I want to stop now for a second and say that after I've been thinking about all this and what then we started to do, and I worked with some other people, including master gardeners, friends who are in the room, including a couple farmers and organizers, and we started Montgomery Victory Gardens. And so I want to take a few minutes to tell you about what Montgomery Victory Gardens has been doing and then get onto that revolution word. And I'll turn this off now and see if I'll leave this up now and see if I can entertain you with the magic of speech for the next few minutes. It was the queerest thing when I was learning all this stuff about the system and thinking about where we live in Montgomery County. And we live in a county which has a strong agricultural tradition, which has, I believe, the second largest ag reserve in the entire country by county, and we grow virtually none of the food that we eat in Montgomery County. In fact, unless you're in maybe Clarksburg or Potomac, you have a hard time finding a Montgomery County farmer in a Montgomery County farmer's market. Now, there are a lot of reasons for that, and the price of land is one of them. We'll get into that a little bit more. But so it struck me, it's like, okay, so what we really need to do here is we need to start growing our own food, people. And that's what Montgomery Victory Gardens is about. It's about building a sustainable, self-reliant, truly local food system by encouraging the ethos and the practice of local food production. And that happens on a number of different levels. One of them is certainly personal. We encourage everyone who has, whether you have a backyard or a community garden plot or just a couple square feet of porch that gets enough sunlight in a day, grow some food. We put out a very nice, I'm told, very nice weekly update that talks a lot about local food happenings, gives occasional tips. Many of them, by the way, we'd like to refer people on to the master gardeners who are the experts in this and have just scads of great information on their website. But we're working to encourage personal gardening. We also have started to talk with some people about the larger land use issues on the county level. And specifically, again, the fact that we have all this land that isn't being used for table crop production to feed people in Montgomery County. One of the biggest problems is the land leasing policy. They will generally only lease land for 1 to 2 years, county-owned land, to farmers. Well, no farmer is going to start a sustainable organic, place if they don't know if they're going to be there in 2 years. So that has to change, and we've done some talking with folks at the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission and hope to continue that conversation. There's also plans right now for an incubator farm, some of you may have heard of, which is another way that we can get some land in this county used for local food production. And the other two areas that we focused on, because we were thinking, it's like, okay, not everyone has a backyard, and okay, the ag reserve, that's this whole big problem, but what are the two other, sort of public or quasi-public institutions in the county that have land that we could grow on? Well, one of them is houses of worship, and the other one is schools. I'm happy to say in the houses of worship that we started with the help of the Office of Community Partnerships. We started the first congregational community garden network in the county. has 15 member congregations right now that grow food on their own land. And the majority of that food is donated to food pantries like Manna Food Center or Shepherd's Table to feed the increasing number of hungry people in this county. And it's estimated, by the way, that up to 30%, which seems remarkable, of course, because most of us don't experience it, but it's estimated that up to 30% of the people here in Montgomery County suffer food insecurity, i.e. go hungry at some point during the year. So we're psyched, and if there's anyone here who works with congregations and think they might be interested in starting a community garden and we can help them with it, be part of this network, we're thrilled. Let us know. Talk to me after or contact us. And then the schools. I want to tell a little story here. Some of you may have heard this, and I have actually the press release out on the table there. When I first got into this back in 2009 and started talking to Eric and Pat and other master gardeners, and you start talking to some teachers, and suddenly we began to become aware that there is this problem with vegetable gardens on school property in Montgomery County. It seemed like they weren't allowed somehow. We started agitating. We started talking to members of the county council, particularly Council Member Valerie Irvin, who's been fantastic on this issue. She called a work session in December of 2009 to talk about both community gardens in the parks and vegetable gardens in the schools. David, I believe, it was either David or Ursula, did their usual great presentation about community gardens in the parks, and then they had 4 different members of the school system staff get up there and talk about why it was a bad idea to have vegetable gardens in the schools. And some of the reasons were they were eye rollers, let me tell you. One guy said, well, you never know if, like on the weekend, some well-meaning neighbor is going to come and spray pesticides while no one's looking. And so it was kind of clear that they weren't really keen on this idea. Well, we continued to push. We got Board of Ed members to put a bug in Superintendent Jerry Wiest's ear, and on February 26th of 2010, a day that will live in infamy, he produced a memo explaining why you couldn't have vegetable gardens in schools, including items like pest infestations. All you community gardeners know your gardens are filled with rats. And food allergies, which is great. And this is another one, and the master gardeners are great on this, because they found the list of the 10 most common food allergies. Guess what? It's all stuff they serve in the lunchroom. Nothing that grows in a garden, egg, milk, peanuts. No, we're not going to be growing peanuts or milk, So in any event, master gardeners and Montgomery Victory Gardens worked together. We wrote an open letter to Superintendent Wiest saying, please overturn this ban, and giving him all the reasons why, giving the examples from around the country where this is now being done. And we got over 30 community organizations in the county to sign on, including the Montgomery County Commission on Health. And I know Wendy Fryer is speaking after me. It was a thrill, really, to get them signed on, because nothing brings credibility like the County Commission on Health saying, you should do this. It's good for your health. So in any event, we submitted that letter, and then all of a sudden, we had a meeting with school officials. Now, interestingly, at that meeting, I don't know if you remember this, Pat, because it sort of got downplayed, but at that meeting, they actually said, well, the ban is still in effect, but well, let's talk. And the talking continued throughout the summer. And then there was testimony in front of the county council in October of this past year where I spoke. Now, I was still ranting at that point about this de facto ban must be overturned. And the schools in the county, by the way, there are a number of them who already have gardens, who are afraid to tell people about their gardens. I heard the word intimidation when I'm talking to teachers about vegetable gardens. It's like, you have to be kidding me. So, just to allow these schools to at least say, yeah, this is what we're doing, and it's cool. So while I'm banging on the table, it turns out, members of the staff had started to meet now with master gardeners and with members of the Audubon Naturalist Society to come up with guidelines for vegetable gardens on school property. Now, the final chapter of this is also kind of amusing, because all along we're saying to them after we knew this is happening, you guys, you've got to put out a press release. You've gotten a lot of bad press on this. I don't know who helped create that. You've gotten a lot of bad press on this. You need to get good press. Put out a press release. So up until the final moment, we're trying to persuade them. They wouldn't buy it. They weren't going to do it for whatever reason. So we said, okay, we'll put out the press release, which we did. And our concern, at least my concern at that point, is that the guidelines were only for container gardens. And nowhere does it say anything about in-ground gardens on these new guidelines. Even though the staff at the school had told us, in the MCPS had told us, if someone applies for an in-ground garden, we're going to approve it. So I was wondering, like, how do we get the word out about that without saying, oh, they're not telling you the whole truth? Well, lo and behold, when we put the word out to the reporters called them, and this was like the final icing on the cake. They actually told the reporter that, yes, well, it just says container gardens on the site, because we do want people to succeed, and that is the easiest way to start. But you know what? If they want to apply for an in-ground garden, and it's a good application, they know what we're doing, we'll approve it. And it's like, it's in the Gazette, it's official. So I am delighted to announce that you can now grow any kind of garden you want with vegetables on Montgomery County School property. And we certainly hope that a lot of them spring up, not too fast, so the master gardeners don't get, insane trying to help you all with them. But we really, because, young people, the reasons to get young people in gardening, there are so many of them. From confronting childhood obesity and diabetes and what Wendy's going to talk about, to teaching environmental stewardship, to teaching any other subject. Garden is the best hands-on experiential learning laboratory, bar none. And there's also a proud history, which I won't get into right now. That's also another presentation. But there's an amazing history of community and personal food production in this country that goes well back before the Victory Gardens of World War II. There was an actual U.S. school garden army in World War I, where the Department of Education used War Department funding to get kids growing gardens, growing food in schools. So there's a long and a proud history. So that's what Montgomery Victory Gardens has been doing. And now to get to revolution. That word's been bandied about, in relatively stodgy mainstream publications, like the New York Times has called this the good food revolution. Time magazine had an article last week where they specifically said, it's more than a movement, it's a revolution. I'm not sure what the editors at Time magazine think that means, but they're using the word, it's a revolution. Now, I'm an organizer by trade, as you heard from my intro, so I think a lot about things like revolution and how we change, large systems that are harmful and destructive to us. So certainly, there are victories. People say, well, what's the victory for? It's like, well, there's a victory over childhood obesity or nutritionless, tasteless food, and victories are great. But revolution is something more than just individual victories. I think it first began to come together for me when I heard Michael Pollan, speak about a year and a half ago. It was quite amazing. 1,000 people showed up to listen to an author speak. And he was wondering, why are people getting so captivated by the food movement? Why do people get so involved, worked up, and they're like, why? And he was thinking about how children say no, how we all say no. In virtually every country in the world, with one or two exceptions, this means no. Well, he was wondering, how did that happen? And his hypothesis is that that comes from a child trying to keep you from putting food in its mouth that it doesn't want, right? No, you will not put that in my mouth. And he termed this the proto-political act. That wasn't supposed to be a joke line, but okay. Seriously. Seriously. A proto-political act, meaning the first time that any human being tries to exert its free will, tries to exert its influence on the world around it, is in relation to its food and what gets put into its mouth. And that's one of the reasons that we are so closely bonded to the issue of food and what gets put in our mouth. I also, as I thought more about this, and think about the activity of growing food and the connection to nature and soil, and that's certainly revolutionary when you consider the fact that most children don't even know where food comes from anymore, that we've completely given up our birthright, to be connected to the soil, to the earth that we do ultimately all come from and go back to, and are nourished by in between. But then I started thinking more about, well, how we think, our philosophies, how do they change with food growing? And is that part of this revolution? Well, it is, I think, and in 3 different ways. One of them is food production helps relieve us of what Wendell Berry calls the cheap energy mind. The cheap energy mind is two things, actually. It's the fact that, hey, you know, I can do anything I want by just flipping a switch or maybe turning a key, you know, to go to the supermarket. I can get light, I can turn things on, I can go to the store and buy food or food products anyway, all by the use of cheap energy. What this also does, however, is it develops in us a sense of learned helplessness. Unless you have this cheap energy, unless you have the money you need increasingly to get this cheap energy, you can't do any of this stuff. You know, it's about a radical reduction in the productivity of a human being. We have become, and particularly when you talk about industrial agriculture, this cheap energy mind and this system is reduced to us, as one colleague of mine said, to become the only species on the planet that doesn't know how to feed itself. So when we grow food, you know, we not only learn, again, how to start feeding ourselves, but I think we start to free ourselves from this cheap energy mind, from this learned helplessness that tells us, no, we need experts, we need other people, we need industries to provide for us. We don't. We can and should be able to provide for ourselves. Now, a second frame of mind that I think changes radically when you begin to do food production, food gardening, is our thinking about our relationship with nature. It has been one of the fundamental problems of the industrial growth model, whether it's agriculture or anything else, that the environment has been seen for decades, probably for 200 years since the Industrial Revolution. The environment is seen as a subset of the economy. You know, we need to do what we need to do to keep the economy going, and if we have money left over that, well, we'll take care of the environment. Well, I think as most of us are finally figuring out, it's actually the exact opposite way. The environment comes first. If the environment isn't healthy, you don't have no economy. You certainly won't have any industrial agriculture. Joel Salatin gave an excellent example of this. He is the now famous, you know, radical, sustainable farmer from Swoops, Virginia, who was featured in The Omnivore's Dilemma and a number of the recent food films. And he talked in one article about the difference between a kid sitting at a computer where, you know, whenever you screw up and, you know, you crash your car or whatever happens, well, you just press a button and start again. He says, go try that out in the garden. You know, so when you're doing food production, when you're working with nature, you get a whole different idea about what it means to be in the world and the importance, again, of keeping the environment healthy. Third, I think growing food really sort of radically changes our ideas about what the pace of life should be. How many people here feel too stressed out on a day-to-day basis? Let me ask again. How many people here feel too stressed out to raise your hands, are you? Another Gandhi quote that's one of my favorites is that there is more to life than increasing its speed. And as I listen to the radio ads for, like, you know, get the new broadband, it's 50 million times faster than the old broadband. You know, when you're in a garden, you're responding to a different set of rhythms. You're responding to natural rhythms, seasonal cycles, sunrise, sunset. You know, that's why for me, I know that my time in the garden is the best hours out of any week of mine, is the time in the garden. I think a big part of that is the fact that I finally get a chance to catch my breath and relax, the way we should all be able to, but we're usually not. Speaking of Gandhi, and this is one well you cannot go back too often, even in terms of local food production, Gandhi was very big on local economies of all sorts, including local food production, which I didn't put it together until recently. I was talking to someone and he was saying, oh yeah, Gandhi knew globalization. I mean, it might have been the 1930s and 40s, but he understood globalization and the harmful effects it has on local populations. So he was all about local economies. Swadeshi was one of the main elements of his national independence movement in India, and it has to do with local economy and self-sufficiency. And growing food locally was a big part of it. He also said that local self-sufficiency was absolutely fundamental to Swaraj, which was the word for self-rule. You cannot govern yourselves if you cannot first take care of yourselves and provide for your own needs. Now, Gandhi, of course, I think, you know, most people think of Gandhi and they think of nonviolence and they think of, you know, lining up and risking arrest, which, you know, is something I have done, and it certainly is still a form of nonviolent resistance. But nonviolent resistance ultimately means withdrawing your participation from the oppressive system. creating your own system outside of it, which, number one, takes care of you, and number two, is the best way to put pressure on the oppressive system to get them to stop. And that's, again, exactly what growing our own food is about. You know, it's the adult, sophisticated version of you are not going to put that food in my mouth. And you know why? Because I'm going to grow the food that I put in my mouth, or I'm going to buy it from the farmer, you know, who's up county, or my neighbors who are doing it. And this is resistance. We should make no mistake. The industrial food system is, we might need to edit this out, the industrial food system is evil, okay? I don't use that word lightly, and it must be resisted. Now, let me make clear a couple points when I say that. I'm not talking about an individual spray that someone might use that's produced by a corporation. I'm certainly not talking about the farmers being evil. Farmers are people who are trying to make a living in growing us food, and they need all the support they can get. They've been given, as I discussed earlier, well, I was going to say a very tough row to hoe. That's a little too metaphorical, but farmers have it very tough right now. I'm not talking about farmers. I'm not even talking about Monsanto executives, although sometimes it's tough. And I have to remember, what did Jesus say? Hate the sin, love the sinner, hate the sin, love the sinner. Okay. I'm talking about the system. The system of industrial agriculture is what you saw before. It is an evil system, and it must be resisted. There is, unfortunately, no real compromise to be had. And I'm big on compromise. I'm big on reconciliation. And it's funny because this idea of like, oh, can't organic and industrial coexist? You're hearing that, thank you. You're hearing that. Can I get an amen? You know, it's interesting, we heard that a lot recently in the recent battle around genetically engineered alfalfa, Monsanto's genetically engineered alfalfa, which despite some hints that there may be regulation, Obama's and USDA has just completely deregulated it. Plant everywhere, spray, we'll see what happens later on. Sugar beets too, thank you. So it's kind of funny that while this is happening, the people are saying, oh, can't we coexist? Well, the people who are saying, can't we coexist are, well, number one, they're the system that, as Michael Pollan is saying, is making us fat, sick, and poisoned to begin with. They're the people who have all the money and the power, and the ones that have the lawyers that they're sicking on farmers to try and catch them and put them out of business if, God forbid, a genetically engineered seed has blown into their yard. These are the people who are saying, oh, can't we all get along? I wish we could. But I think ultimately the bottom line is when you realize industrial agriculture presents the problems that it does, that it is ultimately unsustainable, that it's harming us, it's harming the animals, it's harming the workers, it's harming the planet, there is no compromise. We have to resist it, and we do that by growing our own food. In India, when he discovered that clothing bought from the English Empire you know, enforced their own servitude, what did they do? They made their own clothes. When he discovered salt sold and taxed by the British Empire reduced their freedom, what did they do? They made their own salt. When we discover that the industrial agriculture system is giving us food that poisons us and our children and the land and animals, what do? Grow our own food. Thank you. And one other person who thought growing food was absolutely key to independence, Thomas Jefferson, author of the Declaration of Independence, strongly believed in agrarian democracy, the fact that small independent farmers, people who can take care of themselves, are the ones who are best able to safeguard democracy. And there's a great book on that theme. If you haven't heard of this book or this author yet, Sharon Astick, she wrote a book called The Nation of Farmers. This is one of the first books I've read where someone takes very seriously what it means to actually overthrow the industrial agriculture system and produce our own food. And she gives a pretty detailed blueprint for it, so I strongly recommend it. So, Michael Pollan, Gandhi, Thomas Jefferson. I'll end with Martin Luther King. During the civil rights struggles in the 1960s, Martin Luther King said that the jail cell is the doorway to freedom. And he meant that not only that you're going to get your civil rights by doing nonviolent resistance, and sometimes you have to go to jail. I think what he really meant is that the willingness to take this sort of bold action is what frees you internally from the oppression of mind that allows you to go along with an oppressive system. In that case, it's civil rights. In this case, it's industrial agriculture. So I really do believe, as I've thought more about this, that the food garden, the farm, the community garden plot, that is the gateway to freedom for us in the 21st century. And that we need to, by taking this bull by the horns and growing our own food, we need to establish our fundamental birthright, our connection with our taste buds, with our bodies, with our community, with the living Mother Earth and everything that it sustains and sustains us, to realize that we have the ability to go out and grow food which is good for our body, good for our minds, good for our community, and good for the planet. We can do that. And I would argue we need to do that. So Montgomery Victory Gardens, we are thrilled to be continuing in this work, and nothing could make me happier than a time when there is so much food being grown in Montgomery County, and so many community garden plots, and so many schoolyards, and so many churches, and mosques, and synagogues, and so many places in the agriculture reserve that we can't even keep track of it anymore on our weekly update. That is the vision and dream I have, and it's great to have people like you in the room who I think hold and share this vision with us too. So thank you very much.